Welcome to Lawyerpreneur, where we discuss the alternate paths that allow lawyers to engage their entrepreneurialism and distinguish themselves from others, because being a lawyer doesn't have to mean doing business as usual. I'm your host, Jeremy Richter. Today's episode is brought to you by Alps Insurance, the nation's largest direct writer of lawyers' malpractice insurance. Founded for lawyers by lawyers over 30 years ago, Alps works directly with your firm. No broker or agent, and if you do have a claim, the Alps claims handling team is comprised of actual attorneys, all with private experience. Alps roots for the law firms they protect. They believe in your success and nurture your endeavors with industry-leading coverage, risk management resources, and accredited CLEs, offering practical advice for pioneering lawyers like you. And Alps has the slickest online application out there. Qualifying firms can apply, see rates, and bind coverage in about 20 minutes. Right now, you can get 25% off one CLE seminar from Alps. Go to alpsinsurance.com/CLE. That's ALPS insurance.com/CLE and use the promo code Lawyerpreneur upon checkout. In addition to the corporate sponsorship that helps pay for the hosting and transcription of the show, you can support Lawyerpreneur on Patreon at patreon.com/lawyerpreneur. For less than the cost of a .1, you can help pay for the time it takes in creating and editing Lawyerpreneur and receive copies of my two most recent books, Stop Putting Out Fires and Level Up Your Law Practice. Now, on to the interview. I'm here today with Patricia Baxter, who is the managing partner of the Philadelphia office of Morgan & Akins, where she is a civil litigator. She is the founder of the podcast, The Defense Never Rests, and recently she put together a new book called Networked, and we're going to talk about all of those things. So welcome to Lawyerpreneur.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeremy. I'm excited. I saw you start and I watched your journey and I think it's really cool. So as one podcaster to another, I appreciate you.
Well, thanks. When I started at the end of March, I did not think that 9 months later that I would still be asking folks how they're coping with COVID, but here we are.
Yeah, it's kind of like the same question, right? Especially right now. It's I feel like we're back in March a little bit. So
yeah, it certainly feels that way. Yeah, it does. But how are y'all holding up in Philadelphia?
We're good. Like we have essentially been 100% remote since March. We tried to go back in July and August on a voluntary basis, but it was like at 0.25%, and not even 0.25%. It was just like not even a quarter of our staff. And then when things started to roll back, I was just always like, you guys do whatever you want to do, whatever you're comfortable with, just be where you're comfortable, because we can work wherever. We're not tied to a physical location, and we really never have been. So that was just more of a mindset shift than it was an operational shift. But we're doing well. Like every business, we're not as profitable as others, but we're in the black. And I think that's a good thing. There's so many other businesses out there that are going under or have gone under or are struggling, and we're not one of them. So I think I give my gratitude every day that we're in the black and we haven't laid anybody off and we haven't cut salaries. So I'm really proud of us and our team that we've kind of pulled through 2020, knock on wood, so far.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and that's really good, because just today I talked to a plaintiff's lawyer that I've got a case with, and she was telling me that they are completely down right now because a phone line was cut during some construction work. I'm like, how is it that one phone line has got y'all totally down still? Like, go somewhere else. But they're, it's December 2020 and they're still not there where they can do that. And I don't know how you can operate that way, but people still are, I guess.
There are. And I was surprised. You really got to see the firms that had innovated in March and April, who had already innovated. Some really old, tried and true Philadelphia firms had to completely shut down for 2 to 3 weeks to get the operational setup and running. And I was floored at that, because they just seemed to me to have their stuff together, that I think this threw some people for a loop, and some people were ready for it. And it surprised me to see who was and wasn't. So I'm with you.
So how has the shift affected your marketing and branding that you do, if at all?
Well, I mean, it really got us to rethink it. Lucky for me, we had already had kind of pivoted to a online social media marketing platform, and we were still very much trying to figure it out. We were spinning our wheels. We were making a lot of mistakes, but we had started down that path. So we had our podcast already set up. I had already really doubled and tripled down on LinkedIn. So, and we had started doing webinars, but it was just doubling down on those efforts. So when March hit, my in-person speaking got canceled. I shifted to podcasting. So I was like, sign me up for every legal podcast you can find. I said to my admin, and I was on 10 of them within like 2 or 3 months. And we went from 1 or 2 webinars pre-COVID to really one a month pre-COVID. I really upped my LinkedIn game. Like we just put some additional strategies in place. But I was glad that I started that process pre-COVID versus learning it then, because we had so many other stresses going on. Yeah. I'm glad that we didn't have to learn something entirely new. We just had to refine it a bit. So, and I love the online marketing stuff. I imagine you do too. You do a lot of it as well. So it's really such a great way to deliver value to clients that I'm glad that it's been highlighted through COVID, because it's such a wonderful method of marketing and networking.
Yeah. So you'd started your podcast, if March was the shutdown for so many people, y'all had started that several months before. So you had already gone through all your screw ups and figuring everything out. If you're already
still going through screw ups.
Well, yeah, sure. Those are ongoing, but yeah, like you said, there was added stress at that point. So you weren't suddenly strapping on some new thing that you had to totally figure out. You're just like, okay, let's move more of our money into this bank of like, this is how we're going to approach it. So that's good to be ahead of things. And it shows the value of that sort of thing that, still so many firms aren't doing.
And it's funny because I think in February was the first time I signed up for a Zoom account. And it wasn't because of COVID coming down the pike. It was like all these wonderful podcast guests. I can't get to Philadelphia. They're not going to fly and come see me. And before all of our podcasts were live. And so in January and February, we started moving to a remote podcast setup. And there was a lot of kinks with Zoom. But when COVID hit and I shut my office down, I think it was like March 11th or 12th, we had the Zoom stuff in place. So like, I was like, all right, let's hop on a Zoom call. No, nobody else knew how to do it yet, but yeah. I did. And I was like, yes, like something spoke to me beforehand. Not that I'm clairvoyant or anything, but it was the podcast process of just wanting to get guests on that wouldn't fly to Philadelphia that got that infrastructure in place. So it was interesting.
So is there marketing that you do that is separate or apart from the marketing and branding work that you do under the firm's umbrella?
I kind of have 2 thought processes. I have my own personal brand and my own personal marketing. And then there's the firm marketing and the firm brand. And I don't have them clearly separated. I would say the majority of what I do, maybe 60 to 70%, is my personal brand. And really that goes to I have a 60 days to clarity course, which is really about teaching claims professionals and lawyers the mindset needed for the first 60 days of a file. That's my personal
brand. Yeah, and I want to talk about that too. I've got that written down.
That's my personal brand. That's not, the firm supports that. And obviously anything that comes in through the door through that brand benefits the firm. But then I think about like my partners put on a webinar and I was helping them market that webinar online. So my marketing activities really was just to get them more attention on what they were doing, even though I had nothing to do with that webinar. So I kind of look at it both ways.
Yeah. So that's, sorry, I jumped in on you there. Why is the personal side of having that branding and that marketing for you an important thing for you to keep up?
Because I think we all have natural talents, we gravitate towards strengths and certain skill sets. And it's important for me to honor that. I have done the work, the self-awareness work, to know what I'm good at. And I have also done the work to know that it's okay to double down on what I'm good at and hire those people that are better at other things that I'm not, and people that have complementary skill sets. So naturally, I'm going to stick with promoting something that I feel good about, that I'm confident about, that just fits with me naturally, and I enjoy it. So that's important to me. And I think it should be important to everybody. Maybe you can't, when you're younger or when you're first starting out, you don't quite know what your personal brand is. And I will tell you, it took me a year plus to figure it out. And it was a journey that you think you should just sit down and be like, oh, this is what I'm good at. And out pops this personal brand. And it's not that way. It's very much a self-reflection journey. But once you get there, it's so easy to promote because you're not promoting it. This is coming out of you. You're pulled to share it with people because you think it adds value to them. And that's kind of, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's
No, it absolutely does. And I just want to put exclamation points beside like every sentence that you're saying, because so much of it speaks to what I've experienced in the last 4 years of when I started my own law blog in 2016. And then, kind of from that point through 2018, there was a lot of self-assessment and self-discovery and reading books and thinking about things that would help me on a personal level, but also on a business, marketing, branding level of figuring out what I could do that was sustainable for the long haul and that wasn't going to cause me to burn out. And like you said, that it's work, but it's not like grinding work that wears you out. It's work that you can continue to do and enjoy.
And you probably found that you loved blogging. Like, that was probably something you generally enjoyed. And I think, for the first half of my career, I didn't focus on what I enjoyed. I focused on what I, quote, should be doing, what I saw other people doing. It took me a long time to get to the point where I'm like, I'm putting all that aside. I hate doing that. Why am I doing something that I hate? I want to focus on what I love, because what I love will show up in my energy, in my delivery, in the value I'm bringing, and I will keep at it, versus the stuff that you hate that's like pulling teeth to get you to do. That shows up to clients. They see a mile away whether you like what you're doing or not. So I imagine that was probably your journey too, is you found something you loved, and including this podcast.
Yeah. So, I mean, before I went to law school, I was a high school teacher. I enjoyed teaching. Writing, blogging have given me an avenue back into that to share information, and particularly to help along younger lawyers who are on the same path, but a little further behind, just to make that learning curve a little less steep for them, to say, here are some of the successes I had, and here's some of the failures I had. And you can do some of these things too, do it your way, but here's some ideas or some thoughts of how you might go about it. And so writing really gave me that. This podcast has really given me those opportunities as well. And they're things that they aren't traditional marketing. They don't look like what people have been doing for 20 or 30 years, but they have, I think the thing that they have done really well, and importantly, at least from a business perspective of establishing a career in a practice and that sort of thing, is introduce me to new communities of people that I otherwise wouldn't have met, wouldn't have relationships with all over the country. And some of those are lawyers in insurance defense. Some of them are adjusters and claims professionals, but they're people that I wouldn't have interacted with otherwise, who wouldn't have found me. And by having that content available, we've been able to add business to the firm and solidify relationships and, get more business from existing clients. And it's been really effective, but it's been a long game. It hasn't been like I pushed this magic button and it was an amazing transformation either.
We all would love to have that magic button, but yeah, there's no such thing.
Well, and I think the other thing it does too is by continuing to work on that personal brand, is there's so many companies, so many insurance clients that I've talked to who in recent years, they want to hire individual lawyers rather than in the past, a lot of times they were hiring firms and they were hiring the names of firms that they recognize, but now they have lawyers within firms that they want to work with. And so by creating a platform for yourself and having your own brand and your own identity, you put yourself in a position where they can find you and decide whether they want to work with you. And that leads me to, I didn't intend for it to be a segue like this, and I am normally
But
really
you're naturally
terrible at
good at
segues.
segues.
No, I'm terrible at it. But in your LinkedIn bio, you say, I help clients close cases quicker by using early evaluations that make litigation focused and efficient. And that is a part of your brand and your identity that when clients go look you up on LinkedIn, they say, oh, I want to work with that person. So why did that become something that went on your bio?
So when I've done the work to really figure out what I'm good at, what I'm excel at, I came to a couple of conclusions, and then this was my self work. And then I went to existing clients and I didn't do a leading question, but I said, why did you hire me? And why do you keep hiring me? So I had a pool of clients that I could poll, if you will. And this is really what came out of all of that work, is that I am excellent at seeing through the crap early. And I've always done that well. And I'm always on the phone with my clients to be like, yes, we can do that. And here's what's going to happen. And here is, we're on a chessboard, here's move 25, but we could skip to that if you want. Like, I was always very good at that. And I was like, that's why my clients were hiring me, is they wanted an early call of their case. And so many lawyers out there were like, yeah, well, it depends. And we could this and that. And I need to do all these steps before I tell you. And so it really rose out of what am I good at? What are my natural talents? I can take a good dep. I can try a case, but they're not my 100% strengths. I've hired people that are exceptional trial lawyers and can take a dep like you're just in awe of them. Like, I've hired people that are better at it than me, although I considered myself good at it. But my strength, and this is where I prevail over everybody in my office, is that 30,000 foot view early. And I know how to get there, and I know what we need to do to make that call. So why not make that my brand? It just made sense to me. It niches down a little bit, and it eliminates the people that want to spend a ton of money on their cases. I don't know that many people who want to do that, but it eliminates that. It eliminates the people where trial is their go-to strategy. And I'm okay with that. And not everybody agrees with that personal brand, but the people that do are all in 100%. And that's my people. Those are the people that I want to work with, and that should work with me. So that was a long journey to figure that out. And it's still a work in progress, but I'm certainly at a light at the end of the tunnel on that. And I'm excited to promote it, which is, I think, another thing is, if you're not excited about what you do, then you need to rethink your personal brand.
Well, that early evaluation period is something that's really important to me as well. It's something that I've written a lot about over in the last few years, because I don't think, like you said, it's not something that a lot of people focus on. In a lot of ways, it feels like if I'm doing this, I might be leaving money on the table. And in the short run, you might be settling cases early, but you're establishing that trust and that good relationship with the client, that they know that, okay, if I send this to Tricia, like, she's going to do what I need her to do up front, and she may be spending more up front. And we had an evaluation with the client earlier this year where they were, auditing us compared to the other firms they use in Alabama. And they said, you guys spend more money up front in the first 90 or 120 days of the case, but then it levels off, and y'all aren't trying as many cases as some of these other firms. And I'm like nodding my head like, yeah, this is exactly right. And it's because we are doing that evaluation on the front end so that we can know real early what a case should settle for, whether it's a case that can be settled. And if it can be, let's get it there. And
if it's one of those cases that has to try, we're more than happy to try it if we need to, but we're not going to try cases unnecessarily. And so, my partner and I that I work with closely, that's what we're trying to do. And so it was really good to see that feedback from the client of, we are actually, in fact, practicing what we want and it's bearing out. And so, but how is it beneficial to your clients I know the benefit to you and that's what you enjoy, but how is it beneficial to your clients for you to do the early evaluation?
Because I think it puts the decision in their hand. So, when the 60 to 90 day mark, 90% of the cases we call it. We say, this is the likely outcome. And here's the likely exposure if you go to trial. And here's the likely settlement range. And here's how likely you are to prevail at an MSJ or trial. And there are some clear answers that come out of the upfront work. Like you said, we spend more in the first 60 to 90 days than probably other firms, but we spend less on the back end. But that upfront work gets us to answer key questions. And then we have a conversation with a client and they get to decide. And that's really the benefit is you want clarity early on. You want to know what is this going to cost me to get to trial? What is my chance of success at trial? Do I have a strong or weak liability defense? What's my pure exposure? What's my settlement range? If you can have answers to some degree of clarity within the 60 to 90 day mark, you get to have a conversation with your client and they get to decide what to do. They can say, look, you know what, this is a trial candidate for us. I'm good with you proceeding. Or you know what, if it's that bad of a liability case and the damages are really low, I'm going to, and looking at how much it's going to take me to get to trial, then maybe we should throw a nuisance value offer out and get rid of it before we spend that. It's information early is power for the client. And that's what we deliver, is the ability for them to make decisions on where their money is spent and how long a litigation happens and where we proceed.
All right. So in addition to having that in your LinkedIn bio, that this is a focus for you of efficiency and getting this out there early, how do you go about setting the client's expectation for what it's like to work with you?
So, I tell them our process. We have a very clear process of intake when a file comes in. And there's definitely a 90 to 120 day process that gets triaged the moment a file comes in. But I tell them, look, we are going to look under every rock that we can within the first 60 days. After that 60-day mark, you're going to get a report from us, which lays out these options and key questions. And if by chance we can't answer the key questions, you'll know why. And then we're going to have a call. And I require that call, unless it's a slam dunk voluntary dismissal kind of thing. We're going to get on a call somewhere in the 60 to 90 day mark, and we're going to talk about it. And then we're going to have a plan in place. I want you on that call. This is a non-negotiable for me. So we do that. And I do tell them up front, we're going to spend more money. It's going to save you money on the back end. I will give you a budget if you want. Not all clients want budgets,
Sure.
But I will give you an honest, real budget if you want to see what we're about to spend. And then we report every 30 to 60 days, and we reevaluate your case every 60 or so days, or at the key benchmarks of written discovery, record retention, deposition conclusion, and all those key points in the case. And then if something changes, you're alerted right away. So that's the expectation. It is, I say, I will give you clarity up front, and then it's up to you to decide. We don't decide what happens to your case. You decide what happens to your case, but I will make sure that you have the information you need to make a good decision, sometimes a great decision. So
sure. And what's the client I assume you've been doing this for a while now. What's the client feedback been like about those processes?
It's good. Sometimes it's jarring up front. Like sometimes they have a perception of a case that maybe they think it's a really great case and come us 60 days in being like, this is really bad. You're going to, liability sucks for you. Or maybe they have an idea of value and we have different, that's the part where they're like, oh, it can be jarring, and then you talk through it. But for the most part, I think the clients that have been in the business longer, they totally see where we're going, and they appreciate the clarity up front, and they appreciate the honesty up front. And they appreciate us not saying, well, it depends, or, it's too early for this. We will give them a call on their case, even if we aren't certain about it. And I think they appreciate that. Like, we're going to put ourselves on a limb. I think there's so many lawyers out there that are afraid to make a call early or make a decision early, because if they're wrong, the client's going to look at them and be like, didn't you say early that blah, blah, blah? And I don't find my clients do that. My clients know that we are giving them the best answers to questions with the information that we have. And the second that changes, they'll know. But I've had nothing but positive feedback from this process.
All right. Now I'm going to totally pivot without a segue.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, good. All right. You have a podcast, The Defense Never Rests. Tell me a little bit about the podcast and what was the catalyst for it?
So it started in October of 2019. It had been an idea of mine for about a year and a half. Before that, I had wanted to put out information to clients different than a webinar or going to a speaking engagement or sitting and lecturing. Like, I wanted it to be a modern day medium. And I knew clients that listen to podcasts. I have clients that are podcast fanatics, and I happen to love podcasts. So I was like, what mediums can we use that are a little bit different? But I sat on it for a year and I was like, I don't know how to do this. I don't know if it's the right call. And then in August of 2019, I'm like, let's do it. And I gave some staff the project of getting us up and running. And it took us from August to October to do it. I spun my wheels. Like, we got the mics, we got the wrong mics, we got lighting, we got the wrong lighting. Like, we were trying to get our logo done. Like, there was a lot behind the scenes that I didn't expect. And it started out with, let me just take what's in webinar form and put it in a podcast. And it didn't work. Like, it just doesn't work. What really resonated, or what I found what resonated, was stories. Telling stories, whether it's a person's journey or what they've struggled with, or maybe a story about something somebody else is struggling with. But it really has to be human. And I really wanted it to be telling a story that gives value in an entertaining and fun, lighthearted way. I didn't want to be, well, when Smith v. Jones, the court said X, Y, and Z. Like, who wants to listen to that? And who wants to talk about the law? Like, let's talk about the challenges that we face in our everyday life, in work and in life. Because my ideal client and my actual clients, there's so much to them beyond work. So let's deliver content that may actually be useful for them. It may have nothing to do with the claims or law, but it may help them when they show up to their job in some way, shape, or form. So that's where it's at now. It has evolved over the past year, and it will always evolve. It is a flexible, fluid thing that I love doing. One, I get to meet a ton of people, but because it's that growth, it's like, oh, what are we going to do next? Maybe we should take it in this direction. Maybe we should take it in that direction. It's never static. It's never completely defined. And I think that's cool, because not a lot of marketing stuff is like that. So
yeah, a lot of it's really static. I mean, you have your webinars and you pretty much know what you're going to get from them. You have CLEs, you have, conferences, but this is something that can change from one week to the next. It could be a conversation, or, a solo show, and it can be about any number of things. So, and even if it's not something practical that somebody gets to walk away with, it's an opportunity for them to know you better and decide, you know what, I really like her, or I don't really like her.
Right. There's value in that too.
Yeah. And so it is putting yourself out there, because, there is some risk in that. But one of your recent episodes was, should you start a podcast? So I'll just ask, should lawyers who are looking to create a platform and a brand like we've talked about, is that a viable avenue for marketing? I mean, I think I know what your answer is going to be here to some degree, but let's hear it.
Yeah, I mean, yes, 100%. If you love the medium, if you are already a podcast nut, and especially if you're a lawyer, a litigation lawyer, and your job is to ask questions. I mean, I've had 22 years of deposition experience. A podcast is nothing compared to that. It's like a walk in the park. But yes, I am 100%, 1,000% behind lawyers using podcast to market and network. And there's multiple kind of podcast strategies, but it's such a great medium because there's not a ton of lawyers in there. The field is so ripe for people entering it, and that won't always be the case. I have so many people ask me, as I'm sure they do you, should I start a podcast? I'm like, get in now, because 5 years from now, maybe even next year, you're going to be in a sea of a ton of other lawyers where it's not really heavily populated yet. So, I mean, at least compared to like coaching and health and all that. There's podcasts out there. The legal podcasts aren't a lot. So I think there's a space, and especially if you have a personal brand or a personality or something, and you can really create that podcast around that, I think go for it.
Yeah, awesome. I agree. I mean, so many of the podcasts that do exist are about legal tech and things of that nature that really don't affect most of us, or, aren't something you want to listen to. And I think there is space. In fact, I talked to a lawyer called me just last week who had some ideas, and one of them was starting a podcast. And I was like, get in now, establish it now. There's not a better time. It's not going to be a better time later. So and it's a pretty low threshold for entry. You can do it pretty cheap.
Yeah.
And if you're tech savvy at all, you can get in without having to spend a bunch of mental capital or money capital to figure it out and test the waters. And if you like it, great, go forward. And if you don't, then you'll appreciate the statistic that says most podcasts don't last past 7 episodes anyway. And so you'll just be part of that. And so it's fine.
So that's what I was funny. I was reading that the other day and I'm like, hey, I made it. I got well past the 7. So
y'all are over 50 episodes now. So that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah. I think are you at 40? What are you at?
No, this actually, when this comes out, will be episode 33.
Okay. Awesome.
I started out really strong, every week. And then once the fall hit and everything got back into pretty much normal gear again, that fell off, but I'm trying to be consistent here.
Yeah, consistency is key, I think.
Yeah. All right. So you've got a new book out that's a collaborative book. It's called, are you calling it Networked or #Networked?
We call it Networked.
Okay. And so if you're looking for it, there is a hashtag in front of the word networked, but Networked will find you there. And I'm going to read the subtitle because, like any good subtitle, it gives a really clear message about what the book is. How 20 women lawyers overcame the confines of COVID-19 social distancing to create connections, cultivate community, and build businesses in the midst of a global pandemic. All right. So how did this come together?
So I initially started this female lawyer networking group on LinkedIn. And that was formed around February, March, right at the start of COVID. And, when COVID hit, there was about 50 women in this networking group, and all really that were trying to promote their practices or their businesses through LinkedIn. And we kind of came together to help do that. And through that process, we've really gotten to know each other, been a huge support group for each other. If you want to know a question, you just drop a question in the chat and somebody on that is going to know the answer or be able to point you to it. And about, I guess by June or July, whatever math that is, 4 or 5 months later, there's some really solid relationships there. And one of the women had said, you know what, we should write a book about this group. We should write a book about our experiences. And it kind of just snowballed from there. And, out of the 50 women, 20 of them signed up, 20 of us signed up. Not everybody could do it because of time constraints, but 20 of us signed up and we decided to do it. And it sort of evolved into this book of let me tell you my personal story, my career story, my life story. Every chapter in there is different. Every chapter is written by a different woman, but all of them bring their stories and how interconnected we became through the pandemic, through this LinkedIn networking group, and how we used it to help ourselves and each other. I've never been a part of something like this, that it was really just to support each other. And the book is a reflection of that. And it's so interesting since it's come out. We really thought it would only resonate with women. And there have been more men that have reached out to me that have been like, I really found this part of your chapter interesting, and the men that have supported it. I want to say that I wasn't surprised, but I was surprised that it really hit a nerve with them too. And I'm really super proud of that, because we never meant it to be an only female book, but it's 20 female authors.
Yeah.
So, but it was a really cool experience writing a book. It has led me to write, I'm in the process of writing another book, which is more of an individual brand book. And I envision another one after that, but that really opened up my mind to what writing a book could do. And I really am thankful for those women. And we've said this to each other before, is that the 20 of us are bound together for the rest of our lives. Even if we go apart, that we'll always have this to share. And it's been a really, really cool experience.
Well, that is really cool. And I like that, there is so much animosity that arises out of social media. I don't know if you've heard about that, but
no. It's all roses and strawberries.
There's some divisiveness, but this is, and I'll tell you, I've seen more of it on LinkedIn than anywhere else in the last 10 months, is relationships growing, people supporting each other, encouraging each other, and doing interesting things that have arisen out of, their relationships that have started on LinkedIn. And some of them have transitioned out of it into, more personal relationships, into communities that, like you're talking about. And even for me, this year I published a book for Becky Lee, and that she and I knew each other from a different community. But in March on LinkedIn, I posted, if you're doing something interesting, tell me about it, because I'd seen a bunch of people doing cool stuff since the pandemic had started. And she wrote that on there that she had just written a children's book. And so I asked her some questions, and that turned into something that, we published 7 or 8 months later.
That's awesome. I hadn't heard that. That's amazing.
Yeah. And then, there's some other people that I may end up publishing books for them out of it. And it's through relationships and interactions that happened on LinkedIn. And it's just been a really interesting medium to watch evolve over the last 10 months or so.
Yeah, I love that. I didn't realize that you had written a book as well. You'll have to send me the link for that. What's it called?
All right. So Becky's book is called Do You Draw Pictures? And it's an introduction to intellectual property for kids.
That's cool. That's very cool.
And
I'm with you. I think a lot of creative ideas have come out of the pandemic. Writing books, what an easy writing. It's kind of easy. Getting it published may not be so easy. And getting traction may even be harder, but
it can be, but I think you're laying the groundwork fine for being able to do that. You should be all right. All right. So I don't want to keep you. I think this is a good place to wrap it up. So if people want to connect with you and follow you, where can they do that?
LinkedIn primarily. That's my main hub these days. You can always find me. Just look for Patricia Baxter. I am right there, and I would love to connect. Send me a DM, shoot me an email. My contact information is on my page. I would love to hear from you.
All right. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Jeremy. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed today's show. Please take time to rate and subscribe at whatever podcatcher you're listening on. And if you want more from me, you can find me at jeremywrichter.com. You can also find me on Twitter at RichterJW. And if you want the extra audio and benefits available at Patreon, you can become a patron at patreon.com/lawyerpreneur. Thanks for listening.